Welcome to our channel, where the most unbelievable stories come to life. Today, we're bringing you a dramatic, shocking, and truly inspiring story. They fired the chauffeur, but he ended up owning the CEO's car company. A loyal chauffeur was fired for the smallest mistake, but no one could imagine that this unfair decision would become the turning point that changed everything. From being humiliated as an employee to rising as the owner of the powerful CEO's luxury car company, his journey is packed with emotions, humiliation, perseverance, unexpected opportunities, and the sweetest revenge you could ever imagine. If you love stories that are dramatic yet deeply inspiring, make sure to hit the subscribe button so you won't miss any of these extraordinary journeys. Trust me, this story will leave you shocked, touched, and completely satisfied until the very last moment. In a city where skyscrapers glowed like stars at night, a man quietly sat behind the wheel of a polished black sedan. His name was Hui, the personal chauffeur of a famous CEO in the car industry. Outsiders thought it was a dream job, driving luxury cars, mingling with the elite, brushing shoulders with power and money. But only Hui knew the truth. The job was more like a shiny glove, glamorous on the outside, suffocating on the inside. Every morning, Hui had to be at the CEO's mansion gate by 5 a.m., rain or shine, snow or scorching sun. He once joked with his wife, "If one day I don't come home, it's probably because the CEO sent me to fill up gas." In Canada, the truth was, his boss, Jonathan Reed, was notoriously arrogant, demanding, and treated employees like car seats, useful when needed, disposable when worn out. Hui wasn't the type to silently endure. He was patient, yes, but also quietly sarcastic. While driving, he often muttered in his head, "Oh, Mr. Reed, you want to get to the office in 15 minutes? Sure. Let me just fire up the rocket boosters under the car." Out loud, however, he always kept his voice polite. "Yes, sir, right away." That day began like any other. Hui wore his crisp black suit, adjusted his tie, and triple-checked the car before heading out. But the atmosphere inside was different. Jonathan Reed sat in the back seat, face tight, eyes glued to his phone. He had just lost a major deal, and Hui, unfortunately, was about to become his punching bag. "Hui," Reed said coldly, "do you know why I failed that negotiation this morning? Because you were late. 5 minutes late. Do you realize that in those 5 minutes my competitor had the chance to outmaneuver me?" Hui gripped the steering wheel. He knew he had been on time, early in fact, but in Reed's world, truth mattered less than having someone to blame. Hui smirked, but only in his head. "Yes, it must be my fault. Perhaps I should learn how to bend Big Ben's clock just for you." The air in the car thickened. Reed kept ranting about failure, about incompetent employees, about how he deserved perfection. Hui listened silently, but his eyes betrayed something else. A spark, part anger, part challenge, as if he was whispering to himself, "Just wait, Mr. Reed. One day I won't be behind this wheel. I'll be sitting in the chair you think is yours forever." And little did he know, that day would come sooner than he ever imagined. The car sped down the boulevard, trees blurring into streaks outside the window. Inside, the air was so heavy that even the sound of Jonathan Reed's fingers hammering his phone felt like nails in Hui's ears. He sighed silently. He was used to Reed's temper, but today felt different. Reed seemed to be searching for an excuse to explode. And explode he did. "Hui," Reed barked, his voice sharp. "Not only were you late, but you drive like a snail. I lost millions because of you. It's an embarrassment that my company even hired someone as incompetent as you." He clenched his jaw. He knew fighting back would only make it worse. But the sting of being insulted burned hot in his chest. In his head, sarcastic retorts fired off. "Oh, so now I'm not just a driver. I'm also responsible for your billion-dollar deals. Should I handle the negotiations for you next time?" He tilted the rearview mirror slightly and caught Reed's look of pure disdain. That look pierced him deeper than the words themselves, and then Reed snapped his fingers, commanding, "Pull over. Get out. You're fired. Right now." For a moment the world fell silent. The honking of cars, the chatter of pedestrians, even his own heartbeat, faded into nothing. Hui's hands trembled on the steering wheel, not from fear but from the storm of fury boiling inside him. He drew a deep breath, pulled the car to the curb, and stopped. Reed didn't even glance up from his phone, as if destroying a man's livelihood was no more important than sending a text. Hai turned to face him, meeting the CEO's eyes head-on for the first time. His voice was calm, steady. "Mr. Reed, you may fire me from this car, but one day I will sit in your chair, and when that day comes, I'll remember this moment." Reed chuckled, dripping with mockery. "You? A mere chauffeur? Sitting in the CEO's chair? Don't waste my time." Hai didn't answer. He stepped out of the car and shut the door with a firm click. Behind that door lay humiliation, but beyond it, a seed of ambition had just been planted. He looked up at the gray sky above the skyscrapers. To him, those towers were no longer distant symbols of power, they were goals, and he swore, no matter how brutal the climb, he would reach the top. Little did he know, this cruel dismissal would become the very beginning of a journey that would shock the world. Hui walked among the bustling crowds, his leather shoes clicking against the pavement. His mind was a storm, anger, shame, and the suffocating sense that the whole world had turned its back on him. Just minutes ago, he was inside a luxury car, privy to private boardroom conversations, overhearing phone calls worth hundreds of millions. Now he was nothing more than an unemployed man thrown onto the streets, discarded like a used napkin. His phone buzzed. It was his wife. Hai froze, hesitated for a second, then answered, forcing his voice steady. "It's me. Yeah, just a normal day at work. I'll be home early." He couldn't bring himself to tell her the truth. She had sacrificed so much, leaving her hometown to follow him to this city for a better future. Admitting he'd been fired felt like shattering the faith she had placed in him. He ducked into a small cafe, ordered a black coffee, and opened his old laptop to browse job postings. But instead of hope, the screen mocked him. Trivial listings filled the page, while the news feed shouted headlines, "Reed Motors secures new deal. CEO Jonathan Reed reaffirms his dominance in the car industry." Hai chuckled bitterly. The world had no idea that behind those shiny headlines was a tyrant who had just crushed another man's livelihood. As he sat brooding, a voice from the next table broke his thoughts. "You work in the car business? I heard you mention Reed Motors." Hai looked up. A well-dressed, middle-aged man with gold-rimmed glasses met his gaze. He introduced himself as David Collins, an independent investor who had worked with several small car companies. "Ah, I used to drive for Reed," Hui said, half reluctant, half sarcastic. David raised an eyebrow. "A driver? You don't look like someone who only drives. You have the eyes of a man who knows more. Tell me, what's Reed really like?" That was the first moment Hui realized. Everything he had witnessed over years behind the wheel, the phone calls, the outbursts, the corporate secrets overheard, was worth far more than he ever thought. He wasn't just a chauffeur, he was a living witness to an empire. David's eyes gleamed with curiosity and interest, and for the first time, a daring thought crossed Hui's mind. Maybe getting fired wasn't the end. Maybe it was the beginning. David Collins leaned on the table, his eyes sparkling as if he had just found a diamond hidden in the sand. He took a slow sip of espresso and tilted his head toward Hui, his tone half joking, half serious. "My friend, I've met many chauffeurs, but never one with eyes like yours. Most drivers just handle the wheel. You see what's behind it. Fascinating. Now tell me a few stories about Reed. Don't worry, I'm not tabloid press." I hesitated. He wasn't the gossiping type, but the sting of his humiliation burned too deeply to stay silent. He spoke of Reed flipping on partners in a single call, of meetings where Reed cursed employees until they were pale, of deals sealed with methods that were far from honorable. David listened intently, sometimes nodding, sometimes smirking. When Hai paused to sip his coffee, David crossed his arms, leaning in with a hushed voice. "You know, what you just told me, in the right ears, that's not just small talk. That's a treasure map." Hai frowned. "A treasure map?" David smiled. "Exactly. You weren't just driving cars. You were sitting front row to secrets Reed would never want exposed. That's capital, and if used wisely, that capital could topple a giant." Hui's heart pounded faster. All these years he thought of himself as invisible behind the wheel, but now this stranger revealed the truth. His invisibility was an advantage. He knew too much. He had seen too much. David slowly pulled a shiny business card from his leather case and slid it across the table. "This is my number. I'm not promising anything, but if one day you decide to turn today's humiliation into opportunity, call me. I believe you weren't born just to open car doors for other men." Hui picked up the card, his fingers trembling slightly. A strange mix surged inside him: fear, excitement, and the undeniable sense that a door was cracking open to a path he had never considered before. He glanced out at the street. Traffic roared. Skyscrapers loomed arrogantly against the gray sky. But to Hui, nothing. That night, Hui returned to their small apartment in a working-class neighborhood. The dim glow of the street lamp streamed through the window, casting shadows on the damp-stained walls. His wife Mai sat on their worn sofa, cradling their 8-year-old son who had fallen asleep in her arms. The quiet, tender scene tightened Hui's chest. He paused at the door, unwilling to break the stillness. But Mai looked up, her weary eyes instantly sensing something was wrong. "Something happened, didn't it?" she asked softly, though her gaze was searching. He swallowed hard. He was never good at lying, especially not to the woman who had stood by him through every hardship. He sat down and placed the shiny business card David Collins had given him on the table. "I was fired. Today, Reed let me go." Mai was silent. For a moment, the room felt unbearably heavy. Then she clasped his hand tightly and said, "So what? You always told me that job was just a stepping stone. I believe you. Wherever you start over, I'll be here with our son." Her words stung his eyes with unshed tears. To Reed he was disposable, but to this small woman he was her whole world. Hui told Mai about the chance encounter with David at the cafe, about how David called the secrets he knew a treasure map. Mai listened quietly, then asked in a low voice, "Do you trust him?" Hui stared at the gleaming business card, his finger brushing the embossed letters. A storm of doubt churned within him. Part of him longed to seize the chance, while another feared it was just another trap in this ruthless world. "I don't know. But I do know one thing." Hui raised his head, his eyes blazing. "I can't go back to being the man who just opens car doors for someone else. If there's a path, even a dangerous one, I have to take it." Mai smiled faintly and nodded. "Then go. Just don't lose yourself along the way." That night Hui tossed and turned. The steady breathing of his son and the warmth of his wife's arms couldn't quiet the storm inside him. Faces and images flashed in his mind: Reed's arrogant smirk, towering skyscrapers, and that small business card, like a door waiting to be opened. He whispered into the dark, "Tomorrow, I'll call David Collins." The next morning, Hui sat in the tiny kitchen, staring at the shiny business card lying on the table. His coffee had gone cold, unnoticed. His heart pounded like he was standing at the edge of a cliff. He picked up his phone, his finger hovering over the digits printed neatly on the card. "If I call, my life takes a different path. If I don't, I'll slip back into the cycle of odd jobs, invisible in this city." He pictured Reed lounging in his plush office, smirking at the thought of that pitiful chauffeur. Gritting his teeth, Hui pressed call. A warm, steady voice answered on the other end. "Hello." "Hi. I knew you'd call." Hui froze. "You were sure?" David chuckled. "A man like you can't just sit still. I bet you spent all night thinking, didn't you?" Hui let out a bitter smile. He had. "You said I have a treasure map, but specifically, what do you want from me?" There was a pause before David's calm, weighty reply. "I want you to tell me everything you know about Reed Motors. Not rumors, facts. What you saw, what you heard. In return, I'll give you an opportunity. The kind Reed never thought you deserved." Hui's pulse raced. Images flooded his mind. Late-night calls, closed-door meetings, whispered conversations Reed assumed no one else heard. He realized he held a vault of information any investor would kill for, but he also knew that once he spoke, he'd be stepping into a ruthless game of power, where mercy was rare. He spoke slowly, firmly. "If I do this, I don't want to be just a messenger. I want in. I want a seat at the table." On the other end, David burst into laughter. Not mocking, but the satisfied laugh of a man who had just found a partner. "Exactly, Hui. You weren't born to open car doors forever. Good. Meet me this afternoon. We'll begin." The call ended. Hui set the phone down, inhaling deeply. His eyes now carried a new light. No longer defeat, but ambition. Mai stepped out of the bedroom, noticing his stillness. "You called, didn't you?" she asked softly. I nodded, smiling faintly. "Yes, and today, a new chapter begins." That afternoon, Hui arrived at a small Italian restaurant tucked away on a quiet street. It wasn't flashy, no glaring lights like the elite bars downtown, but it carried a refined discretion. David Collins hadn't chosen this place by accident. It was where he often discussed serious deals, safe from prying eyes. Hai entered, his heart pounding as if he were about to face not just a job interview, but a moment that could change his destiny. David was already seated at a corner table, a glass of red wine swirling in front of him. When he saw Hui, he smiled, stood up, and extended a firm handshake. "Welcome to the real world of power games," David said, his eyes gleaming. "Sit down and tell me what you've seen." Hai took a deep breath and sat. Memories raced in his mind. Snippets of rushed conversations. Reed's angry tirades, secret phone calls during late-night drives. He began to recount them. At first his voice was cautious, but soon it grew clearer, sharper, as though he were replaying a movie frame by frame. David listened intently, narrowing his eyes at times, jotting notes in his leather-bound book. Occasionally he chuckled bitterly at Reed's dirty tactics. Other times he nodded with grim satisfaction at the loopholes Reed had exposed. Finally, Hai ended with a detail he wasn't even sure he should reveal. One night, he overheard Reed talking about manipulating numbers in a major deal, inflating the company's value before international investors. David froze for a moment, then set down his wine with a decisive tone. "Hai, you've just handed me a dagger, and if we wield it right, we can strike straight at the giant's heart." A shiver ran down Hui's spine. From a fired chauffeur, he was now seated at the table of power. He realized he was no longer an outsider. David leaned forward, his eyes glittering with vision. "I don't just want to bring Reed down. I want to build a new car company. Clean, transparent, stronger than anything he's ever owned. And I want you on board. Not as a driver, but as a partner. The question is, are you willing to stake your life on this game?" For a moment the room fell silent. All he could hear was the pounding of his heart and the roar of ambition rising inside him. He nodded slowly, but firmly. "I've been underestimated long enough. If this is my chance to rise, I'll take it. I don't just want to escape Reed's shadow, I want to surpass him." David grinned, raising his glass. "Then cheers to my new partner." The two glasses clinked, ringing out like a vow, marking the beginning of a stormy new chapter. David set down his glass and pulled a thick folder from his leather briefcase. Sliding it across the table, his sharp gaze carried the weight of a test. "This," David said, "is what I've gathered on Reed Motors over the past few years. I know he's greedy, ruthless, willing to crush anyone in his way. But I've never had someone on the inside. You're the missing piece." Hui opened the folder. Pages of numbers, charts, and financial reports stared back at him. Though he wasn't formally trained in business, even he could see the red flags. Profits inflated beyond reason, projects grossly exaggerated, phantom contracts that never saw the light of day. David tapped his fingers on the table. Voice deliberate. "We'll start with Reed's greatest weakness, his greed and arrogance. He believes no one dares to oppose him, and that's why he leaves cracks. Your job is to confirm what I suspect. With solid proof, I'll bring in other investors, and then Reed will collapse under the weight of his own empire." Hai sat quietly, feeling as though he was boarding a ship bound for uncharted waters. Fear prickled at him, fear of failure, fear of retaliation, but so did a thrill he had never known before. He looked up and asked firmly, "You want me to be a spy?" David smiled. "No, I want you to be your own eyes and ears. You know Reed's system inside out. You've seen him at his rawest. That's an edge no financial analyst can buy. I'll show you the path. But how you walk it, that's up to you." Closing the folder, Hui's eyes burned with new determination. He had been tossed aside like trash, treated as worthless. Now, he had a chance to turn humiliation into a weapon, to use his past behind the wheel as the key to his future. He extended his hand and gripped David's firmly. "All right, we start today," David grinned, the grin of a man seasoned in high-stakes games. "Good, then prepare yourself, Hui. From this moment, you're no longer a chauffeur. You're a player." Outside, the city lights flickered to life. The streets buzzed as always, but to Hui, the world seemed to slow. He knew he had stepped onto a road with no turning back, and it was the very road that could lead him to a peak Reed never imagined he'd reach. 9 p.m. Basement level 3 was silent, filled only with the low hum of ventilation fans echoing through the cold air. Hai descended the steps, his heartbeat pounding like war drums. The fluorescent lights flickered on and off, casting eerie shadows across the rows of cars. He stopped, taking a deep breath. The message still glowed on his phone. Was this truly an opportunity, or just a trap Reed had set to catch him? From a distance, a figure emerged between the parked cars. A man in a gray jacket, baseball cap pulled low. As Hai approached, the man lifted his head, fear glinting in his eyes. "You're the one who texted me?" Hui asked cautiously. The man nodded, voice trembling. "I'm from accounting. I can't take it anymore. Reed is faking the books, and I have proof." He handed Hui a small USB drive, his hands shaking as though he were handing over his life itself. "These are internal statements, doctored reports, and emails Reed sent us. If this gets out, I'm finished. But if no one stands up, he'll keep going." Hui stared at the USB in his palm, feeling its weight like a ticking bomb. This was exactly what he and David needed, but also the evidence that could get him hunted down if Reed discovered it. Suddenly, a noise echoed. From the far end of the garage, a flashlight beam swept across, footsteps pounding against the concrete. Both Hai and the gray-jacketed man froze. "Damn it! They followed me!" the man gasped.
"You have to go now!"
Without thinking, Hai shoved the USB into his pocket and sprinted toward the emergency stairwell. Behind him, footsteps closed in, the flashlight's beam slicing the darkness like a blade. His heart hammered. Only one thought echoed in his mind. If I'm caught now, it's over. He burst through the stairwell door, pounding up the metal steps, sweat pouring down his back. Shouts rang out behind him, but he didn't stop. At street level, he pushed through the exit, merging into the crowd outside, gasping for air, cold sweat dripping down his spine. In his pocket, the USB burned like a live flame. And Hai knew, from this moment on, he had crossed into the danger zone, where only the strong would survive. In the dimly lit apartment, yellow light casting shadows on damp walls, Hai and David sat across from each other. On the table lay the small USB drive, silent yet heavy as a bomb. Hui had barely escaped the parking garage, sweat still clinging to his forehead. David eyed it, half serious, half excited. This could be treasure, or a trap, but we have to open it. Hai plugged the USB into his old laptop. The screen lit up, revealing folders, internal reports, confidential, Q4 financial adjustments, board emails. Both men held their breath, as though unlocking a forbidden door. They clicked the first folder. A series of spreadsheets appeared, numbers highlighted in strange colors. Hai frowned. David leaned closer, pointing at the revenue column. "Look, the report to shareholders shows profits up 27%, but the internal version? Barely 3%. He inflated it nearly tenfold. Hai opened the email files. Inside were exchanges between Reed and the CFO. "Don't let the real numbers slip. Make sure the final draft looks more appealing. If necessary, hire outside auditors to cover it up. We just need to keep shareholders calm for a few more quarters. After that, who cares?" The cold words made Hui's skin crawl. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This was undeniable proof of systematic fraud. David smirked. "Reed thinks he's untouchable, but with this, we can turn him into a fraud in front of the whole world." Hui stayed quiet. He saw again Reed lounging in the back of his Bentley, treating him like dirt. Now he held the rope that could drag that arrogant CEO into the mud. But fear whispered, "If I reveal this too soon, Reed will strike back and bury everything. If I wait too long, he'll shore up his defenses." David seemed to read his mind. He laid a hand on Hui's shoulder, his voice firm. "Hey, I've played games like this before. Timing is everything. We stay quiet, gather more proof, and when we strike, we won't just destroy Reed. We'll take his chair." Hui nodded, eyes burning with resolve. There was no turning back. This USB wasn't just evidence. It was his ticket from discarded chauffeur to formidable rival. And in that moment, he whispered silently, "Reed, you started this game. Now watch who finishes it." In the days that followed, Reed Motors launched a fierce counterattack. Rumors had spread in the press, but within 24 hours, a flood of grand press releases hit. Reed Motors denied all accusations, calling the articles baseless, defamatory, and blaming competitors' smear campaigns. On television, Reed appeared in a flawless suit, smiling calmly. Speaking smoothly as if the whole thing were a joke, he stared straight into the camera, voice steady with confidence. "Reed Motors is a transparent company. We have always upheld the highest values of trust. These baseless accusations cannot shake the truth." At the same time, his legal team sent threatening letters to several news outlets, demanding retractions or face lawsuits. Some journalists backed off. Coverage cooled down. Reed was far too practiced in putting out fires, with money and influence. In the cramped apartment, Hui watched the interview on his old TV. Reed's arrogant smile, his air of victory, made Hui's knuckles turn white as he clenched his fists. He's slipping away again, just like always. He knows how to turn lies into truth. David, however, simply chuckled, shaking his head. Don't be impatient. This is just the prelude. Reed is building himself a wall of arrogance. The higher it goes, the louder it will crash when it falls. He picked up the USB and handed Hui a freshly printed stack of documents. This is only a fraction. Look at the board emails. There are exchanges where Reed directly instructs the CFO to forge signatures. If we release them now, it'll only make him more cautious. But at the right moment, when shareholders are already wavering, this will be the knockout punch. He nodded, though his chest still churned with conflict. He longed to strike immediately, yet knew the wisdom in David's strategy. That night, while Mai and their son slept, Hui sat alone in front of his laptop. He reread every email, every cold word Reed had written. Each line stabbed at the memory of his humiliation. "You're 5 minutes late. You're incompetent. You don't deserve my chair." The insults echoed in his mind, mixing with the evidence of fraud before him. His chest tightened, a fire rising inside. He whispered into the darkness, "Reed, this time you won't escape. I'll make the whole world see who you really are." A week later, Hui stepped into the Reed Motors headquarters with a completely different mindset. In the past, every time he came here, he was just the chauffeur, waiting outside with car keys in hand, staring up at the gleaming windows where billion-dollar deals were struck. But today, he returned not to open doors, but as an observer, a hidden player in a power game Reed had no idea he was part of. Thanks to an old friend working as a guard, Hui slipped into the staff parking lot unnoticed. He sat in a quiet corner, phone in hand, pretending to scroll. But in reality, he was taking notes. The key faces entering and leaving, the luxury cars of major partners, even the exact timing of Reed's arrivals. "That man still thinks no one can touch him," Hui muttered as Reed's sleek black Bentley rolled into the garage. "But he doesn't know the man he fired is plotting to bring his empire crashing down." That evening he met David at his modest apartment on the outskirts of town. On the table lay a large map covered in sticky notes, names of partners, lists of recent deals, and several red circles highlighting weak points. David pointed to one bright red circle. "Here, the European parts import deal. I suspect the numbers were inflated by at least 40%. Hui, you drove Reed to sign this one, didn't you?" "What did he say in the car?" Hui closed his eyes, rewinding the memory. He recalled Reed laughing smugly during a call, bragging that a few forged signatures would make everything look legitimate. "You guessed right," he confirmed firmly. "I heard him say they'd put lipstick on the report to fool the board. If you want evidence, I can give you the exact date and time." David's lips curled into a smile, his eyes glinting. "Excellent. You're not just a witness. You're the golden piece I needed. Next, we'll plant seeds of doubt among the shareholders. Once trust wavers, Reed will lose his foundation." Hui nodded, though emotions churned inside him. This was no longer a game. This was war. And he, the man cast out in disgrace, was preparing to strike first. He clenched his fist and swore silently. "Reed, you laughed in my face. Now I'll make you choke on every last laugh." Hui and David set their first move with caution and ruthless precision. The plan was not a loud assault, but a string of fine, sharp strikes aimed straight at those who truly held the power: shareholders and the press. If they worked subtly, Reed's polished image would be stripped slowly in public view. And when trust wobbled, value would plummet like an ant blown from its nest. David handed Hui a timeline, meeting points, and names of a few middle managers who had shown unease about the numbers. "You only need to confirm what you heard," he said. "Record dates, voices, exact phrases, a detailed report. I'll use it to cross-check, and then an anonymous source will become the first article." Hui began his work like a quiet gold digger. He returned to the old office under new guises: a delivery man, a temporary cleaner, a faux maintenance worker, any role that could bring him closer to closed-door meetings. Each time Reed exited a meeting, he noted the time. Each call Reed made, he jotted down suspicious phrases. Each envelope Reed accepted. He tried to remember handwriting, the smell of ink, the smallest details. There were moments when courage nearly failed him. One night, while rifling through a boardroom mailbox, a recently serviced security camera made a tiny whine. His heart pounded. A figure appeared at the corridor's end. How could he escape? Luck held it was another janitor, absorbed with his trolley. Hui froze in the shadows, feeling his life hang by a taut string. Meanwhile, David worked outside, approaching investigative reporter Elena Park, known for exposing corporate fraud. David handed Elena an anonymous letter with snippets of evidence, copied emails with fuzzy timestamps, a few suspicious invoices. Elena's instincts sparked. She asked for more proof, and David replied lightly, "We have an insider. He will help you verify." The first news item dropped like a pebble into a still pond. The article didn't name names but asked hard questions. Do the recent numbers in Reed Motors' report truly reflect reality? It pointed out inconsistencies, shady contracts, and emphasized an anonymous source supplying data. Though anonymous, the piece was enough to shake the market. Reed Motors' shares wavered, and rumors buzzed through executive suites. Hai watched the laptop screen in a cafe, his hand trembling not from cold. The red graphs tumbled downward. He felt both vindicated and terrified. He rejoiced at the initial victory but feared Reed's reaction. If he finds the leak, Hai worried, imagining all forms of possible retaliation. Indeed, the response was swift. Reed called an emergency meeting, his face taut and explosive. He suspected an information leak inside. Security tightened, access lists were reviewed, and every camera was rechecked. "Find the source, and if anyone's involved, remove them," he ordered coldly, mercilessly. I felt a chill. David warned, "Now is the time for silence, not reckless moves. We've cracked the shell. Next is to skillfully exploit the chaos. Move carefully." They shifted tactics. Instead of aggressive exposure, they'd let Reed reveal himself through his mistakes. Night fell. Hui returned to his apartment and looked at his sleeping wife and child. Pride and dread warred inside him. He had changed from the discarded driver to a man steering a high-stakes game, but with greater power came greater risk. He wondered whether toppling Reed was justice or merely personal revenge masked as righteous action. The question hung heavy, but there was no turning back. Then a short message blinked on his phone. "Be careful. They are tracing the leak." No signature. The message struck cold, reminding Hui the game had only just begun, and danger was closing in minute by minute. Inside Reed Motors' gleaming glass tower, the atmosphere was as tense as a courtroom. Reed stormed into the emergency boardroom meeting, his face dark, eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night drowning in fury. On the table lay scattered newspapers, headlines full of insinuations about errors in the financial reports. He slammed one down, his voice a growl. "There is a traitor among us, a rat leaking information, and I want to know who it is." Silence. The senior executives glanced at each other, pale-faced. They knew Reed was not a man to forgive. Once suspicion fell on someone, their career was over. Reed pointed at the giant screen, showing Reed Motors' stock price bleeding red. "In just 24 hours, our value dropped over 8%. Do you think I'll sit by and watch my life's work evaporate? From now on, security will be airtight. Every email, every call, every step in this building will be monitored. And I swear, whoever betrayed me will pay." The news spread through the company like wildfire. Employees whispered nervously in the hallways, eyes darting. Some began turning on colleagues, accusing, gossiping, feeding the paranoia. Elsewhere in the city, Hai sat in his familiar cafe, staring at the warning text, "They are tracing the leak." His heart pounded. He had never imagined the fight would become this psychological. Reed's insults were one thing, but being hunted like a criminal was something else entirely. Across from him, David calmly stirred his cappuccino. "This is exactly what we want, Hui," he said softly. "The more Reed loses his composure, the more mistakes he'll make. He'll drive his employees into panic, and that panic will give us more cracks to exploit." "But what about me?" Hui asked tensely. "If he traces this back to me," David cut him off, eyes cold as steel. "You chose this game, Hui. The winner stands at the top. The loser disappears. You must accept both outcomes." Hui fell silent. David's words were sharp, cruelly true. He looked out the cafe window, where the fading afternoon light dappled the street. In that crowded city, he felt as though he were walking a tightrope. a vast abyss yawning beneath him. And then his phone buzzed again. A new message. I know Mr. Reed is committing fraud. I have proof, but I can't tell anyone. Meet me tonight, 9 p.m., basement level 3. Hoy's eyes widened at the screen. No sender's name. Just a few blunt words. David raised an eyebrow and smirked. Looks like another rat in the nest is starting to squeal. Hoy gripped his phone tightly, unease twisting in his gut. This could be a golden opportunity, or the perfect trap Reed had laid to flush out the real traitor. David placed the dossier on the table, the printed pages thick with crossed-out marks. He looked at Hoy like a commander sizing up a new recruit. Now we need someone reputable and influential among the shareholders. Someone Reed cannot easily ignore. Small investors will shout, but Reed can silence them with money. A major shareholder with weight will force the board to listen. Hoy listened, heart pounding. David was right. Instead of shouting in the streets, they had to worry those inside the power structure. To do that, they needed an ally with clout, someone Reed respected or at least could not dismiss. David named Margaret Lawson, director of Lawson Capital, a powerful woman who had shared tables with Reed at many conferences and was known as an industry patron for her influence and network. She's cautious, David explained, but if presented with verifiable evidence, she will act, not out of spite, but to protect her fund's capital. If Margaret asks the board for an independent audit, Reed will have a hard time covering it up. Hoy agreed immediately. The thought of Reed flinching at a name like Margaret thrilled him. But David warned, we don't give her everything, just enough to sow doubt. Some emails, a doctored ledger snapshot, presented professionally and unemotionally. Margaret hates sloppy claims. She needs data and a reliable source. They prepared meticulously. David engaged a lawyer to draft a concise legal brief highlighting verifiable items, timestamps of emails, identities involved, comparisons between internal and public reports. Hoy's task was to verify specifics, exact days he heard Reed's comments, witnesses, and the files on his USB. Every fact had to be airtight. On meeting day, Hoy wore a simple but neat suit. He knew he wasn't high society, but that authenticity was his advantage. A witness from real life, not an opportunistic broker. They met Margaret in Lawson Capital's high-rise office overlooking the river, where conversations were measured and judged by numbers. Margaret, a woman in her 50s with silver hair and incisive eyes, received them seriously. David opened with professional precision, not accusations, but analysis. He presented discrepancies, printed emails, and a side-by-side profit comparison. Margaret read quietly, flipping through pages with an experienced gaze. When it was Hoy's turn, David nodded. Mr. Hoy, please summarize what you witnessed. Hoy inhaled and spoke plainly. Without theatrics, facts only. The day Reed talked about a few forged signatures, the call with the CFO, the adjusted report. He mentioned the USB in his possession. Margaret asked short, sharp questions. The date, other witnesses, and whether Hoy could provide the original files for an audit. Hoy answered directly and offered to let an auditor inspect the USB. She tapped the table thoughtfully. I don't act on words alone, but if there's original documentation and an independent audit confirms it, Lawson Capital will request a re-audit, and if necessary, convene the board. That was all they needed. Margaret didn't promise immediate action, but her influence could cause Reed to feel pressure. David acknowledged her formally. Hoy exhaled, relief and tension mixed. Outside Lawson Capital, Hoy asked, if Reed knows Margaret's suspicious, what will he do? David shrugged. He'll try bribery, threats, or distraction. But Margaret's network is strong. We must give her leverage without exposing our source. She can use her power, but she mustn't know everything about where the data came from. In the following days, whispers began in closed shareholder meetings. Lawson Capital requested scrutiny. Other funds inquired discreetly. Reed sensed the shift. Senior managers approached him, urging calm and saying, let the legal team handle it. Pressure mounted, not from tabloids, but from the money itself. At home, Mai noticed the change in Huey's face, a weary strength. She squeezed his hand and whispered, you've come so far. I believe in you. Her words warmed him, but he knew each move from now on would shape not only Reed's fate, but his family's. That night, I thought of David's line. We need a powerful player, but we must not expose our source. They had gained significant ground, and also opened a chain reaction that Reed would likely strike back against fiercely. An investors' meeting in a few weeks loomed as the first public battleground. Hoy closed his eyes, imagining the lights, the questions, and the cameras. Fear and resolve swirled inside him. Yet he knew there was no turning back. In the days leading up to the shareholders' meeting, the atmosphere inside Reed Motors was like a smoke-filled room. Suffocating, heavy, everyone sensing something was wrong but too afraid to speak. Reed stalked the halls like a wounded lion, his sharp eyes making employees shrink away, none daring to meet his gaze. Across town in David's small apartment, Hui sat with him preparing for the coming battle. On the table lay stacks of documents, comparisons, emails, internal reports. Hui was exhausted, but his eyes burned with determination. He knew this meeting wouldn't just be about questioning Reed, it was their golden chance to flip the game. David spoke slowly. We won't reveal everything at once. We'll make the shareholders doubt. They'll demand an independent audit themselves. Once that happens, Reed won't be able to sweep this under the rug. He nodded, though nerves twisted inside him. He had never been to a shareholders' meeting, never faced a room full of powerful faces. The thought made his palms slick with sweat. Don't worry, David reassured him. You just tell them what you witnessed. Remember, you're no longer a chauffeur. You're the man bringing the truth into the light. Mai, quietly sitting nearby, suddenly clasped his hand. She looked straight into his eyes, her voice firm. You've come this far. Don't turn back. Whatever happens, our son and I are with you. Her words filled Hui with new strength. From a man humiliated by Reed, he was now preparing to face an entire boardroom and speak truths no one expected. The night before the meeting, Hui couldn't sleep. He sat alone by the window, staring at the city lights flickering in the distance. In his mind, he saw Reed's arrogant grin, the insults of the past, and the vision of tomorrow when, for the first time, Reed would be forced to hear the voice of the fired chauffeur echo through the very boardroom he once ruled. He whispered like a vow, Tomorrow, I'll make you tremble. The day of the shareholders' meeting arrived. Reed Motors' headquarters blazed with lights, security doubled at every entrance. Outside the gates, luxury cars lined up as major shareholders, lawyers, and investors stepped out in tailored suits. Reporters swarmed, cameras flashing like fireworks, shouting, Mr. Reed! Any comments on the fraud allegations? Reed only smirked and walked past. Inside, the atmosphere was tense beneath the grand chandeliers. Shareholders filled the hall, their eyes wary, doubtful. Some whispered, the profit figures don't add up. Last quarter's growth was unusually fast. Their murmurs pricked holes in Reed's air of confidence. Reed took the podium, still exuding arrogance, his deep voice booming. Ladies and gentlemen, I know there have been baseless rumors lately trying to tarnish Reed Motors' reputation, but I stand here to affirm, our company is stronger than ever. You've trusted me for years, and I've never let you down. A smattering of applause followed, but far weaker than usual. Reed's smile faltered for a split second. Then he launched back into his polished speech about vision and expansion strategy, glossy words masking the fear beneath. In a corner, Hui sat with David, his heart hammering. This was the first time he had entered the very hall he once only glimpsed from the driver's seat outside. He breathed deeply, eyes locked on the familiar figure at the podium. Reed looked the same, confident, arrogant, treating everyone like pawns. Then Margaret Lawson rose to her feet. The entire room fell silent. She placed a folder on the table, her voice clear and sharp. Mr. Reed, I demand an independent audit. Last quarter's numbers show multiple irregularities. As a major shareholder, Lawson Capital requires full transparency. If you refuse, we will escalate this to the full board. A ripple of shock spread across the hall. Several shareholders nodded in agreement. Others scribbled notes rapidly. Reed froze for a moment before forcing a smile. Mrs. Lawson, surely you've been swayed by sensational reports. I assure you. No, Mr. Reed. Margaret cut him off, voice like steel. I don't rely on rumors. I rely on data. And if necessary, I'll deliver it to the audit committee today. Reed's smile cracked. For the first time, the untouchable CEO looked unsettled. To Hui, it was the first glimpse of a king realizing his throne was shaking. David leaned in, whispering, This is just the opening move. Hold steady, your turn is coming. He swallowed hard, gripping the folder in his bag. He knew. In just a few minutes, the fired chauffeur would step into the spotlight. The murmurs in the hall swelled, then fell silent when Margaret's voice rang out. "There is a witness, someone who worked closely with Mr. Reed for years." All eyes followed her gesture and landed on Hui. A ripple of shock spread across the room. Some shareholders whispered, "Who is he?" "The chauffeur?" Reed froze, then sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is laughable. That man is nothing more than my former chauffeur, someone I fired for incompetence. And you expect to believe the word of a driver?" Slowly, Hui rose to his feet. His heart pounded against his ribs, but his voice rang clear, every word sharp. "Yes, I was his chauffeur. I sat behind the wheel, hearing his calls, watching him sign papers, witnessing every trick he used to hide the truth. He humiliated me, discarded me like trash. But that's why I remember every word he said, every number he falsified." He pulled a folder from his bag and held it up. "These are the original emails where Mr. Reed instructed his CFO to add a few forged signatures to mislead shareholders. This is the internal report showing 3% profit, while the public report claims 27%. All of it is on this USB, ready for independent auditors to verify." The hall erupted in gasps and whispers. Several shareholders jumped to their feet, demanding to see the evidence. Outside, reporters pressed cameras against the glass, catching the commotion through muffled echoes. Reed's face flushed crimson, his voice breaking as he shouted, "Lies! All of it, fabricated by this man as revenge." But Hui's gaze locked on him, no longer the gaze of a subordinate, but of an equal adversary. "If this data is fake, then let an independent audit confirm it right here, right now. Do you dare, Mr. Reed?" The room fell silent. Dozens of eyes, suspicious, angry, disappointed, bore down on Reed. And in that moment, for the first time, Hui saw the arrogant CEO who once treated him like nothing begin to tremble. The boardroom exploded with noise. Shareholders shouted over one another, "We want to see the data right now. The audit committee must step in. If Reed can't prove this, our stock will collapse." Reed tried to compose himself, raising his hands for silence. A forced smile stretched across his lips, but his eyes betrayed panic. "Ladies and gentlemen, don't let a disgruntled man's stunt damage the empire we've built together. Everything he presented could easily be fabricated. You've known me for 20 years. I turned Reed Motors into a global icon. Will you trust a lowly driver over the man who's brought you profits?" But his silver tongue no longer worked. A major shareholder slammed the table, face flushed. "Don't distract us, Reed. I've invested hundreds of millions. I deserve to know if my money is with an honest leader or a fraud." Voices of agreement surged. Margaret Lawson stepped forward, her tone like steel. "Mr. Reed, you can pull the accounting data right now for comparison. If you're clean, you have nothing to fear. If you refuse, that is the clearest answer of all." Reed hesitated. Sweat beaded on his forehead. He glared at Hui with burning hatred, as if to devour him on the spot. But that look only deepened suspicion among the board. Then a senior executive spoke up, voice trembling. "Ladies and gentlemen, I once received emails from Mr. Reed ordering me to alter reports. I stayed silent to keep my job, but I can't hide anymore." The room froze. A wave of outrage and shock rippled through. Others joined in, confessing they too had been pressured to sign off, to polish the numbers. Reed reeled, betrayed by his own circle. He screamed, his voice cracking, "You traitors! You owe me everything. Without me, Reed Motors would have died years ago." But his outburst drowned beneath the fury of the crowd. The chairman of the board struck the gavel sharply. "We will convene an independent audit immediately, and pending the outcome, Mr. Reed is hereby suspended as CEO." The hall erupted. Hui stood frozen, his knees weak. The moment he had dreamed of was finally here. Reed stripped of his crown before everyone's eyes. David leaned close, whispering, "You've landed the first blow. But the real war is only beginning." After the suspension decision, Reed was forced off the podium. Security staff escorted him out, firm but controlled. The hall buzzed with noise as cameras flashed, capturing the once mighty CEO lowering his head, clinging to the last scraps of dignity. Hui sat frozen, hands trembling as he clenched them tight. He could hardly believe what had just happened. The man who once barked orders at him, humiliated him daily, had now been abandoned by the very power brokers he relied on. A surge of satisfaction filled Hui, but it was quickly followed by unease. David leaned close, whispering, "Don't think it's over. Reed isn't the kind to sit quietly. He'll come back, and when he does, he'll aim straight at us." Indeed, that evening, headlines blared, "CEO Reed suspended." Yet simultaneously, other outlets published glowing defenses, calling it a smear campaign by rivals. Clearly, Reed still had the money and connections to bend the media. Meanwhile, social media erupted. The public split in two. Some rejoiced at seeing the giant toppled, while others defended Reed as a misunderstood genius. Heated debates raged, the hashtag and Reed Motors trending everywhere. In his small apartment, Hui scrolled through the storm. His name began surfacing in comments. Who's this chauffeur? Did he fabricate the story? It takes guts to stand up like that. He realized the spotlight was now on him. From a nobody, he had become the center of a corporate scandal shaking the nation. And he knew the next step wasn't just to destroy Reed, but to prove he was worthy of rising even higher. David set down his glass, his voice steady. This is the golden moment. With Reed weakened, we prepare to seize the company, not just to destroy but to rebuild. And Hui, you will no longer be an outsider. You will be the heir to Reed Motors. Hui's pulse raced. The idea was both insane and intoxicating. From a fired chauffeur, he was now on the brink of the greatest power play of his life. In the dim yellow light of the room, Hui whispered like a vow, "Reed looked down on me, but I'll make the world see that even a chauffeur can become the boss." After Reed's suspension, it seemed as if the skies had cleared for Hui and David, but beneath the city's surface, undercurrents were stirring. Reed vanished from public view. No office appearances, no press statements. Rumors said he was resting in a seaside villa. But David knew a wounded tiger never lies still. Sure enough, days later a barrage of articles suddenly hit, targeting Hui. They painted him as a bitter chauffeur, an opportunist fabricating stories, even dragging his poor background into the spotlight. One headline screamed, "The man who brought down Reed Motors, hero or opportunist." He read them, his blood boiling. Each word was a knife cutting into his pride. He clenched the newspaper, trembling. He's turning me into a liar in front of the world. David was calmer, eyes glinting behind his glasses. Reed is using his best weapon, public opinion and money. But remember, Hui, we have the truth. And if revealed properly, truth can cut deeper than any smear campaign. He laid out a new plan. Contact 3 wavering major shareholders. One was a Swiss investment fund director, another a U.S. tech billionaire, and the third a German automaker giant. If we secure their support, Reed will lose all ground. And when the board must choose a replacement, your name will be on the table. Hui's chest tightened. He, a poor chauffeur once, was now being painted into the role of potential CEO of a billion-dollar empire. The thought was both intoxicating and terrifying. But, will they believe me? He whispered. David smiled, voice steady. They don't need to believe you're a genius. They just need to believe you hold the truth and that you're safer than a disgraced fraud. And that, Hui, is our advantage. That night, alone in the dark, Hui stared at his hands. Hands once used only for steering a wheel, now held the fate of an empire. He realized, from here on, every step wasn't just about avenging Reed, it was about proving if he had the strength to stand among the powerful. Outside, the night sky was heavy and dark. Somewhere in the shadows, Reed was plotting too. And the real battle for Reed Motors had only just begun. David and Hui set their sights on their first target, Klaus Weber, director of a German automaker holding nearly 12% of Reed Motors' shares. Klaus was known for being cold, pragmatic, caring only about profits. But for that very reason, if he saw Reed Motors as a sinking ship, he wouldn't hesitate to jump. The meeting was held in a private room of a luxury hotel. Klaus sat in the center, fingers interlaced, icy blue eyes fixed on Hui. His voice was low, gravelly, and direct. "You're the former chauffeur? The man who got Reed suspended?" Hui drew a deep breath. His heart pounded, but he recalled David's advice. "Don't act like a beggar. Show him you're the keeper of truth." "Yes," Hui answered firmly. "I was the driver, and I witnessed firsthand how Mr. Reed deceived shareholders. I'm no financier, but I hold undeniable proof. If you want, An independent auditor can verify it. David slid over a slim dossier, carefully selected emails and internal reports, just enough to convince but not expose every card. Klaus skimmed through, his eyes narrowing. "Suppose this is real," he said slowly. "What do you want from me?" David leaned in, voice steady. "We want a shareholder vote to replace leadership. Reed no longer fits, and we want you to be the first to publicly call for an independent audit. If you stand, others will follow." Klaus studied them for a long moment, then gave a thin smile. "You're bold. A chauffeur aiming for the CEO's chair? Sounds like a fairy tale. But sometimes the market likes fairy tales, if they push stock prices up." He tapped the table lightly. "I haven't decided yet, but I'll consider. If the audit confirms your claims, I'll be the first to sign against Reed." Hai exhaled in relief. Not a promise, but a door cracked open. Meanwhile, at a seaside villa, Reed sat before a wall of news screens. Gone was the smug grin, but in his eyes glinted malice. A lawyer leaned close and whispered, "We've prepared everything. If needed, we can release dirt on Hoy. Debts, personal troubles. Public opinion will turn on him." Reed's lips twisted into a bitter smile. "Good. He wants war? Then he'll taste the mud. A chauffeur will never belong at my table." Outside, the waves roared under the dark sky, heralding a storm on the horizon. 2 days after the meeting with Klaus Weber, Hai woke to find his name plastered across headlines: "Driver who toppled Reed Motors once bankrupt. Can he be trusted?" The man who accused CEO Reed. Hero or opportunist? Old photos resurfaced. Hai hauling crates at a port, clothes dirty, face worn. Social media buzzed. He's just making it up for fame. What would a chauffeur know about finance? Probably paid off by Reed's rivals. He sat frozen before the screen, sweat cold on his back. Mai wrapped her arms around him, whispering, "Don't read it. I know they just want to break you." But his throat tightened. Old scars, poverty, debt, humiliation were being paraded as public entertainment. David strode in, tossing a paper onto the table, voice sharp. "I expected this. Reed will attack your past because he can't beat the truth with numbers. But Hai, understand this. The more he attacks, the more dangerous you are to him. That means we're on the right track." Hui clenched his fists. "But what about my family? If they keep digging, twisting lies, my son will have to grow up with their mockery." David held his gaze for a long moment, then said quietly, "If you want to lead, you must accept the light shining into every shadow of your life. Your choice is either silence, letting Reed survive, or standing tall and proving that truth outlives any smear." That night, sitting alone in the dark, Hui's phone buzzed. A message anonymous. "If you want out of this mess, meet me. I know how to make the public believe you." Location: underground bar, Old Quarter. Time 11 p.m. Hui stared at the words. It could be a chance to strike back, or another trap Reed set. He shut his eyes, inhaled deeply. David's voice echoed in his mind. "In this game, only those who dare step into danger have a chance to win." Hui grabbed his coat, whispering into the night, "Fine. If it's a trap, I'll turn it into an opportunity." The underground bar in the Old Quarter sat beneath a row of worn buildings. Dim lights flickering, soft jazz drifting from an old speaker. The air was thick with smoke and whiskey. Hui stepped inside, heart pounding, cap pulled low as he scanned the faces, trying to guess who had texted him. In the corner, a woman sat alone, a martini in her hand. The light revealed sharp features, short copper hair, eyes bright yet calculating. When she saw Hui, she gave a faint smile and gestured, "Mr. Hai, finally we meet." Hui froze. He had never seen her before, but her tone suggested she knew far more than he was comfortable with. "Who are you?" he asked warily. She sipped her martini, then set it down. "My name is Sophia Tran. I work for an international media management firm. To put it simply, I help people like you turn from targets into heroes in the public eye." Hie frowned. "And in return, what do you want?" Sophia smiled, the smile of someone accustomed to shadowy deals. "I don't work for free, but I don't need money now. I want a seat on the board once you take the company. I want Reed Motors to expand into Asia, and I'll control its media presence there." The word stunned Hui. She not only believed he could topple Reed, but also that he would become CEO. It thrilled him. and made him suspicious. How? Do I know you're not Reed's plant, sent to test me? He asked, eyes narrowing. Sophia chuckled softly, then laid her phone on the table. The screen showed a lineup of unpublished articles, headlines ready to go. The brave chauffeur who stood up to CEO Reed, a new symbol of integrity. With one click, tomorrow's press paints you as a hero. The public will adore you instead of doubting you. That's my power. Reed has money, but I control the narrative. Hui sat silent. David's words echoed in his mind. In this game, whoever controls belief controls victory. Finally, he raised his head, locking eyes with Sophia. I'll work with you. But remember, I'm no puppet. I rise on truth, not scripted lies. Sophia smiled, lifting her glass. Very well. Let's turn that truth into a story the world can't resist. In the bar's dim light, their hands met in a dangerous handshake, forming a new alliance. And he knew, from this moment he wasn't just fighting Reed in the boardroom, but on the brutal battlefield of public opinion. The next morning, Hui woke in his small apartment to find the world around him transformed. On his phone, headlines flooded in. The chauffeur who stood up, a new symbol of corporate justice. Hey, from behind the wheel to the front line of fighting corruption. Television screens showed footage of him in the boardroom, holding documents, eyes blazing with determination. The anchor's voice brimmed with excitement. He isn't a lawyer, not a financier, just an ordinary driver, yet he dared to challenge a billionaire CEO's power. Mai watched, eyes welling with tears. She gripped his hand tightly. See? Finally, people understand you. Hui stayed silent, feeling relief mixed with unease. This was clearly Sophia's work, her crafted narrative turning him into a hero. The public loved the ordinary man versus giant story. And now, he was their symbol. On the streets, whispers followed him. At a cafe, a young man approached, hand outstretched. Are you Hui? I just want to say, you've given us hope. Thank you. Hui shook his hand, his heart heavy with a strange mix of pride and pressure. He was no longer a nameless chauffeur. Now he was a symbol, and symbols could not afford to fall. Meanwhile, at the seaside villa, Reed watched the broadcasts with searing rage. His grip tightened until his wine glass shattered, red liquid spilling like blood. Those bastards. They've made him a hero? A lowly driver daring to stand at my level? Reed roared, turning to his loyal lawyer. Prepare the lawsuit. I'll charge him with defamation and breach of confidentiality. If he wants war, I'll drag him into court and crush him in public. The lawyer hesitated. But sir, if the independent audit proceeds, the data might expose us. Reed slammed the table. Then stall it. Delay, bribe, threaten, I don't care. Just long enough for him to collapse under legal pressure. Let's see how long a chauffeur can survive in the firestorm of lawsuits. He laughed loudly, though fear flickered in his eyes. Reed knew this time his opponent wasn't just a driver. Behind Hui stood forces willing to gamble billions on this power struggle, and in this war, either Reed Motors would change hands, or everyone would sink together. News of Reed Motors suing Hui spread like wildfire. TV anchors read the statement with solemn faces. Mr. Reed, former CEO of Reed Motors, has filed a lawsuit against his former chauffeur, Hui, for defamation, breach of confidentiality, and damage to reputation. If he loses, Hui could face tens of millions in damages. The city trembled. Some immediately doubted Hui. So, he made it all up. The truth will come out in court. But others were furious. Reed is using money to silence the man who dared to speak. Stand with the driver. On social media, Hoska Stand with Hui trended, clashing with Hoska Trust Reed. The battle was no longer confined to the boardroom. It raged across media, public opinion, and every screen in the nation. In the small apartment, Hui's hands shook as he held the lawsuit papers. The damages listed were enough to crush anyone, especially a man who had once been drowning in debt. David, he stammered, if I lose, it's not just the end of this fight. My family will be ruined. Worse than before. David's gaze was firm, voice unyielding. That's exactly why Reed chose this. He knows he can't win with truth, so he uses fear to make you back down. But Hui, if you retreat now, everything we've built collapses, and he'll come back stronger than ever. Mai sat close, her eyes red but resolute. Hui, I lived with a husband humiliated, discarded, treated like nothing. I don't want to go back there. I want to live with a man who fought to the end, no matter the outcome. Her words struck deep. Fear roared inside Hui, but alongside it burned pride. He was no longer the man behind the wheel, taking orders. He had stepped into the light, and the world was watching. Hui lifted his head, eyes blazing. Fine, if he wants to drag me into court, then I'll make the courtroom the stage where the truth comes out. David smiled faintly, clapping his shoulder. That's the spirit of a man who will reshape Reed Motors. You won't just defend. You'll attack. Outside, the city lights glimmered. But to Hui, they weren't just lights. They were the eyes of millions waiting for him to stand tall. The first day in court felt like a championship final. Outside the courthouse, reporters and cameras swarmed. Police struggled to hold back chanting crowds split into two factions. Stand with Hui. Banners with a steering wheel, the symbol of the brave chauffeur. Trust Reed. Flags with Reed's face in his tailored suit. Supporters shouting his name. Reed arrived in a sleek limousine, flanked by a wall of lawyers. He gave reporters his trademark smirk. Justice will prevail. The court will show who the liar truly is. Moments later, an old sedan pulled up. Hui stepped out in a modest suit, David beside him, their small legal team following. The crowd erupted. Hui! 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 A reporter shoved a mic toward him. Are you afraid of losing? If you owe millions in damages, what will you do? Hui paused, then met the camera with steady eyes. I don't have millions to lose. What I have is the truth, and truth cannot be bought. The crowd roared in applause. Inside, the courtroom was tense. On one side, Reed's army of black-suited lawyers spread piles of documents. On the other, Hui and David sat with thinner files but eyes burning with resolve. The judge began. Plaintiff, Mr. Reed, you may proceed. Reed's lead attorney rose, voice sharp. Your Honor, we accuse the defendant, Mr. Hui, of defamation and breach of confidentiality. He is a disgruntled chauffeur with no expertise, fabricating stories to topple a CEO. His so-called evidence lacks legal foundation, and his actions have gravely damaged Reed Motors' reputation and market value. Whispers spread across the room. Reed leaned back, smirking. Then it was Hui's turn. He stood breathing deeply. The room fell silent as eyes fixed on the man who once was nothing more than a shadow behind the wheel. Your Honor, his voice rang out, firm and clear. Yes, I was a chauffeur, but that's exactly why I was present in moments Mr. Reed thought no one saw. I heard him order falsifications, I saw the reports altered, and I preserved the evidence. He held up a USB stick. This is the truth, and truth doesn't need me to be a CEO or a lawyer to have value. Truth only needs one thing, to be heard. For a moment, the courtroom froze. Cameras zoomed on Hui's face, not a lowly driver anymore, but a man daring to stand before the world with truth in hand. Reed's teeth clenched, his smirk gone. For the first time, the game was no longer his to control. The judge struck the gavel, signaling the session to continue. The air was so thick it felt ready to explode. All eyes fixed on the tiny USB in Hui's hand. His lawyer slid it into the projector. On the big screen, emails appeared line by line. This quarter's growth isn't attractive enough. Redo the report. Add forged signatures. Don't let the shareholders suspect. If anyone objects, transfer them elsewhere. Leave no trace. Each sentence landed like a blade, drawing shocked murmurs across the courtroom. Some shareholders present went pale, whispering frantically. Reed's face drained of color, sweat glistening at his temple, though he fought to look composed. Reed's attorney shot up, objecting, Your Honor, these emails could be fabricated. We cannot accept them as legitimate evidence. But David calmly rose, presenting another folder. Your Honor, here are verifications from 3 independent tech experts, all confirming the data has not been altered. We're ready for the court to summon them as witnesses. The judge nodded, making a note. The murmurs swelled like waves. A journalist whispered to her colleague, Tomorrow's headline, Explosive Emails Rock Reed Motors. Stock prices will crash. Reed staggered to his feet, voice hoarse, clinging to the last vestige of authority. This is a setup, a conspiracy to overthrow me and steal my company. You cannot trust a chauffeur over the man who built Reed Motors to greatness. But this time his words fell flat. Faces in the room, shareholders, journalists, the audience, stared at him, stripped of reverence, filled only with doubt and anger. He sat down, heart-pounding. He had dropped the first bomb, and he knew, from this moment, Reed was no longer untouchable. David leaned close, whispering, You've cracked his wall of arrogance. And when it falls, the whole empire will fall with it. Outside, social media exploded. The hashtag #WatchRead emails surged everywhere. Screenshots of each damning line spread like wildfire. A new era was beginning, one where a nameless chauffeur had turned the entire world into witnesses to a historic takedown. The night after the trial, Reed Motors was a sinking ship. Its stock plummeted nearly 30%, investors panicked, and headlines screamed worldwide. Leaked emails shake Reed Motors to its core. Billion-dollar empire on the brink. The chauffeur who turned a CEO into a defendant. On social media, her Reed emails and Chauffeur stand with Hai surged to the top of global trends. The image of Hai holding up the USB in court became iconic, turned into posters, memes, even T-shirts with the slogan, "Truth can't be fired." In an emergency board meeting, the atmosphere was suffocating. A major shareholder slammed the table. "We can't keep Reed anymore. The company is bleeding, millions lost by the second." Another voice countered, "But who will replace him? If we hand the company over to outsiders, what do we have left?" Then the name dropped, quiet but thunderous. Hui. Silence. Someone scoffed, "A chauffeur as CEO? Are you insane?" But Margaret Lawson leaned forward, her voice firm. "We don't just need a new CEO. We need a symbol to restore public trust. Look outside. Who do millions cheer for? Who embodies the image of the ordinary man daring to defy power? It's Hui. The market doesn't need another finance expert. The market needs a story." The boardroom buzzed. For the first time, the impossible began to feel inevitable. In his small apartment, Hui sat frozen, scrolling through headlines. Mai touched his shoulder, her voice trembling. "Hui, they're calling you the future CEO." David sipped his coffee, eyes gleaming. "See, Hui!" From a fired chauffeur, "The world now waits for you to take the CEO's chair. This is the moment no one expected, and the chance of a lifetime." Hai clenched his fists, torn between disbelief and the crushing weight of expectation. He whispered to himself, "Can I really become a CEO?" While the public cheered Hui's name at his seaside villa, Reed gathered his last loyal allies, the shareholders who had shared in his dirty profits for years. His face flushed, voice hoarse with rage. "They want to put a chauffeur in the CEO's chair? Never. If he takes that seat, all our secrets will spill out." "You'll sink with me," one shareholder muttered. But the public has turned. Stocks are in freefall, and Hui is hailed as a hero. Reed slammed his hand down, shattering his glass. "Then we'll turn him into a fraud." "I still have cards to play." Tonight his black file goes public, his debts, his past lawsuits, even a DUI rumor. Enough to smear him, to make the board too afraid to trust him. In his apartment, Hui read Sophia's urgent message. "Reed is preparing a smear campaign against your past. I can block some, but the rumors will spread. Be ready." I sat heavy-hearted. Every scar of his past, the debts, the mistakes, would be dragged into the light. His fists clenched. "How many times must I pay for my youth's mistakes? Yes, I was poor, in debt, I failed. But I stood back up. Why can't they see that?" Mai wrapped her arms around him. "Because you dared to challenge Reed, they'll use everything to break you. But I believe, as long as you stand tall, their lies mean nothing." David nodded slowly. "What Reed doesn't understand is this. The public doesn't want a flawless saint. They want someone real, someone who stumbled, fell, but rose again. That's what makes you stronger than him." The next day, Reed's smear hit the headlines. Driver's bankruptcy. Can he be trusted? CEO candidate or fraud in disguise? But Reed hadn't predicted the backlash. Under every article, thousands of comments poured in. Who hasn't made mistakes? What matters is he rose from them. Because he suffered, he understands us. Reed just proves how scared he is of Hui. A new hashtag emerged. Kashk Wiari Hui, turning Hui into a symbol for everyone, once belittled but still standing. Reed read the news. His face drained. He hurled his phone screaming, "Impossible!" A chauffeur turned into a symbol? Meanwhile, at Reed Motors headquarters, the board issued its notice. A vote to elect a new CEO will take place within 48 hours. The world held its breath, and Hui, once fired in disgrace, now stood just one vote away from the CEO's throne. The day of the vote arrived. Reed Motors headquarters was packed like a festival, yet the air was heavy, charged like the moment before a storm. Reporters, investors, employees crowded every hall. Everyone knew. Today would decide the company's fate. In the main boardroom, leather chairs formed a circle. The major shareholders sat in silence, folders and ballots before them. At the head of the table, the CEO's chair sat empty, like a throne awaiting its ruler. Reed appeared suddenly, though suspended. His dark suit hung loosely on his frame, but his eyes still blazed. He stood at the door, voice hoarse but booming. "You're making a mistake. Handing this empire to a poor chauffeur with no degree, no experience, he'll drag us all into ruin." The room fell silent. Margaret Lawson replied calmly, "No, Mr. Reed, you dragged us into ruin, and the truth has exposed it." Reed laughed bitterly, his gaze drilling into Hui. "You think you can replace me? You're just a man behind the wheel. What do you know of running an empire?" Hai rose. His heart pounded, but his voice rang steady. "You're right. I'm no financier, no management genius. I'm just someone who was belittled, fired, humiliated. But that's why I know the value of trust. I won't promise to make Reed Motors the biggest company, but I promise I'll never build it on lies." Whispers rippled through the room. Shareholders nodded, moved by the simple weight of his words. The chairman declared, "We proceed to vote." Ballots dropped one by one. The tension was suffocating, every breath audible. At last the secretary opened the box and read aloud, "Votes in favor, 11%. Votes against, 42%. The room erupted in cheers. Margaret rose to shake Hui's hand. David gripped his shoulder, whispering, "You did it!" From chauffeur to CEO, Reed staggered, his face ashen. He screamed in desperation, "No! This is a farce! A farce!" But his voice drowned in thunderous applause. All eyes turned away from Reed, now fixed on Hai, the ordinary man who had just claimed the most powerful seat of all. The hall still thundered with applause as Hai was invited to the CEO's chair. He walked slowly, hands trembling slightly. That black leather seat had once been a distant throne, something he glimpsed only in the rearview mirror while driving Reed. Now the world watched, waiting for him to claim it. David nudged his shoulder, whispering, "Go on. This isn't just about defeating Reed. It's about proving to yourself that you belong here." Hui laid a hand on the chair, closing his eyes for a moment. Memories crashed over him, Reed's voice snarling, "You're useless." The day he was cast out into the rain, the sleepless nights, buried in debt. All the bitterness fused together, then shattered, leaving only the sweetness of triumph. He sat down. The room erupted in cheers, cameras flashing like lightning. Then Hui rose again, microphone in hand, his voice deep and steady. "Today I don't sit here as a genius or a finance expert. I sit here as a man who failed, who was humiliated, who was fired. And because of that, I know what Reed Motors needs. A new beginning, built on transparency, honesty, and trust." His gaze swept the room. "Reed Motors doesn't belong to me alone. It belongs to every employee who worked tirelessly, every customer who believed, and every person who's been watching. I promise this company will never again be built on lies. From today we steer toward the truth." The applause roared, some employees wiping away tears. At the back, Mai clutched their son, tears streaming down her smiling face. Outside the doors, Reed stood frozen, his aged face twisted with fury and helplessness. He knew. The throne he had clung to for decades now belonged to the man he once despised most. That night, back in his modest apartment, Hai stepped onto the balcony, gazing at the glowing city skyline. He drew a long breath. The world no longer saw him as just a chauffeur or a whistleblower, but as a symbol of change. He whispered to himself, from the driver's seat to the CEO's chair, "This is only the beginning."